Our next speaker is going to be Mark Sees. Mark is a native Floridian born in Titusville, Florida. He received his Bachelor's of Science in Biology with a minor in Chemistry from Freed-Hardeman University and has worked as a biological consultant for Post Buckley Shoe and Jernigan. And for the last 18 years, Mark has worked for the City of Orlando as the Wetlands Manager of the Orlando Easterly Wetlands Park. Day-to-day activities include monitoring water levels and water quality, overseeing various research, implementing controlled burning program, implementing vegetation management plans, providing technical tours, and conducting public presentations. You're going to be talking to us today about Orlando Easterly Wetlands filter marshes, their design, function, and results.
Thank y'all for inviting me back, and I think it's an amazing thing what this group does. It is not often that you see a organization like this put on an event like this, pay for it to bring all of us here, and so that is really an amazing feat. And so John Hitchcock and all the rest of United Waterfowlers, you guys are to be commended for that, so we appreciate that. Okay, so last time I was here, I spoke about the Orlando Easterly Wetlands. It's kind of what I know best, and want to talk to you a little bit about the Easterly Wetlands today. And I thought I'd first start off just talking about wetlands. And you know, as I've been sitting here listening today, it's really dawned on me that all of us are out there and we're searching for ways. All of us want to manage these wetlands, to bring them back because we see the importance that they provide to us. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, the uses of them. We'll talk about the wetlands park as well, and then how we manage those wetlands. You know, wetlands, obviously the EPA hit the mark when they called them our kidneys. Wetlands are just like our Earth's kidneys. They filter and clean our water, and that is, you know, one of the most important things that we rely on wetlands for. And you know, it also strikes me very interesting that it wasn't that many years ago that wetlands were viewed as just kind of a wasted piece of land that we need to drain, and it's got rich soil under. You know, and then it hasn't been that many years ago that we've decided, you know what, we really need to manage these wetlands. And so then constructed wetlands kind of was born out of that, and that's where the Orlando Easterly Wetlands comes in to play. The biological productivity of wetlands cannot be understated. Wetlands cover 6.4% of the Earth's surface, but yet they account for 1/4 of the Earth's biological productivity. That's pretty impressive. The habitat, and that's, you know, why we're here today, to talk about the habitat. 80% of all breeding bird populations need wetlands in order to complete their life cycle. Greater than 50% of all protected migratory species, 95% of all those fish and shellfish that we like to eat have to have wetlands, not just, you know, deep ocean or deep water habitats, but wetland habitat to complete their life cycle. So it cannot be understated how important wetlands are. And when we talk about our threatened and endangered species, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has come to say 43% of these animals and plants rely directly or indirectly on wetlands. So we know how critical wetland habitat is. We also know the functions. I think most people here in this room probably wrote the book on the functions, but obviously flood control and protecting our water balance, protecting the shoreline, trapping sediments and controlling that, helping with controlling our climate. That's an important feature. Biogeochemical cycling. You know, we talk a lot about nitrogen and phosphorus sequestration, but also suspended solids, filtering and cleaning our water. There's a whole host of other pollutants that wetlands are able to remediate. And biological productivity, groundwater control and recharge. But that nutrient removal is one of the things that I'm probably going to focus on today, because those nutrients, as we all know, have a dramatic effect on fish and wildlife populations. When nutrient levels in our and our lakes, rivers, and streams become out of whack, we see the impacts on wildlife. That's been talked about there at Lake George and other places. So wetlands are really important in how they immobilize different nutrients and other pollutants. Of course, wetlands, and where I've come to know them, have been in wastewater treatment. There is that high rate of biological productivity, but also there's a lot of deposition that occurs. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. You've been hearing about all that organic matter that's building up in our wetlands, and some of it's floating, as you heard about in Lake George. You know, what do you do with that? How do we deal with that? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But wetland treatment systems have really grown in popularity. You know, not only for industry, but for mine runoff, wastewater treatment systems. There's about 32 of these wastewater treatment wetlands now in the state of Florida. There's about 600 across the United States. There's about 2,000 worldwide. So there's been a lot of interest. In fact, just about every month of the year, I have international visitors who come to see our Orlando easterly wetlands. Just Wednesday, we had a fella from Abu Dhabi of the United Arab Emirates who was coming to look at our wetlands to see how it runs and how it operates, and how can they use that to help clean their water. So I'm very proud of the work that's done here in Florida. We really do lead the way in managing wetlands, and a lot of folks around the world look to us. This is just kind of a side note I put in. One of the things that I feel like wetlands they haven't really caught on, but I think they could be of huge benefit, is in the treatment of nitrates coming out of septic tanks. We all have heard about the nitrate problems or the nitrogen enrichment of our springs, which is causing algal blooms, and we see deterioration of our spring runs and spring sheds. DEP linked 22% of the nitrogen loading to the Wekiva River is coming from septic tanks. So that leachate comes out of those septic tanks, get into the groundwater table, and comes out of the spring and causes a problem. You know what does really good at removing nitrates? Wetland plants. So why not take, and this is my shameless plug because I want to do this, I want to see these become more popular, but take our septic tanks, take the leachate out of the septic tank, put in a little bit of clay or a plastic liner or something, run that leachate across that, and let's grow some wetland plants. And you know what? Our nitrate, we're going to see huge nitrate reductions out of septic tanks. Simple solution, but we don't do it. Something we need to do. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the Orlando easterly wetlands and how we manage our wetlands. So Iron Bridge, those of you from UCF, and we got several of those folks from Orlando, Iron Bridge is a regional wastewater treatment plant that takes raw sewage from these different communities: Orlando, Maitland, Castleberry, Winter Park, parts of Orange, and parts of Seminole County. It treats wastewater for about 500,000 people or so. We take that water and then we pump through a 48-inch diameter concrete pipeline that's 17 miles long out to the Orlando easterly wetlands, which actually has the claim to fame that it's the world's first large-scale constructed wetland treatment system. So all those great things, all those great functions we're talking about, we took and built a wetlands to capitalize on that. Once we get the water there, the Orlando easterly wetlands was a design system. The property that was purchased was 1,650 acres. We took 1,200 acres, created over 18 miles of berms and levees that create 18 different cells, treatment cells, and then we put all these different water control structures to help us send the water through the wetlands, and then we use that to remove and reduce the excess nitrogen and phosphorus that we all know is in reclaimed water. But that is not a good thing for our lakes, rivers, or streams. And so our goal, the Iron Bridge is located in the St. Johns River watershed, and so our goal is to help protect that St. Johns River system. Now to get this wetlands going, this was all cattle pasture when we started. We built the berm roads, we built the pipeline, we built the infrastructure to pump about 20 million gallons of water a day out here. We had to bring in over 2.2 million plants. Around 60 species of plants were planted in that wetlands. Right now, we've been re-rated. We can handle up to 35 million gallons a day. It takes about 20 to 40 days. So once the water, it takes about a day for water to make it through a wastewater treatment plant. They do a great job. That's an award-winning plant. I don't want to discount what they do because we certainly couldn't do what we do without the Iron Bridge plant and the great job that they do. They're an award-winning plant. They get the numbers down as low as really the technology allows them to do so. But once we get it, our job is to remove those nutrients. And it takes typically about 30 days, depending on rainfall and drought and that sort of thing, for the water to make its way through the wetlands. It's just stair steps through these. There's a 15-foot drop in elevation, so it comes in here, flows into this first cell, drops into the next one, drops into the next one, and so on its way as it makes its way through these cells and ultimately ends up in the St. Johns River. We have 3 different flow trains. The water is broken into 3 different pathways. And again, this was the world's first large-scale wetland treatment system. The design engineers really didn't have a clue about what was going to be needed in the future, but I give them a lot of credit because they gave us a lot of management flexibility. And so we are able to individually shut off, like this cell right here, which is number 10. We can shut that off and divert water all the way around it. Or we can shut off our entire northern flow train, which is in red, and we can divert the water around it. So it's given us a lot of management flexibility. We created different habitats. The first habitat is a deep marsh, and it depends on kind of the age of the marsh as to how much interspersion there might be, but most of these areas are dominated by cattails or bulrush. And so this is what you see, and you saw the black-bellied whistling ducks there. The next marsh that it moves into is more of a mixed marsh, and so this is where we've probably spent more of our time trying to manage because we want to keep this as a low marsh with those low flag-type plants, pickerweed, duck potato, maiden cane, things of that, water lilies, spatterdock, things of that nature. This is where we see a lot of our wildlife habitat. We've created this system, and let me tell you, the wildlife has responded. And so have the people. It's also, when it was originally built, it was never intended to be a park. After it was built, about 2 years after, the mayor of Orlando came in and said, this has got to be open as a park. So we opened it as a park, and every day we have scores of photographers and bird watchers and nature lovers. And this lady just happened to come out and get the National Geographic pictures of the day. And just to let you know, there are 6 ducks in this picture. Can you guys see them? I counted them. There's a bunch of blue-winged teal right here. All right. Beautiful sunsets, beautiful sunrises at the wetlands. This is probably the most intensively monitored wetlands in the state. 365 days a year, there is somebody out there collecting water samples on what flows in and what flows out of this. Every 30 minutes, we're sampling the water and putting it into a jug that goes back to our laboratory. Even on Christmas, even on Mother's Day, we're monitoring the wetlands, making sure that our beloved St. Johns River is protected. Did you hear that, Water Management District?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We're doing our job. All right. This give you a little profile. Our nitrogen comes in somewhere in this. This is about a 26-year average or so. It comes in. It immediately drops in the wetlands. This is one of the things that the engineers and designers realized right away is, wow, this system works a lot better than we ever imagined. You know, they thought that the profile would look something like this. But no, we have a lot of capacity. And so that's allowed us, it was originally designed for 20 million. We have tested it up to 57 million gallons a day. And so we are confident that we can remove a lot more nutrients than what we're actually doing. So that's what we're allowed to discharge, 2.3 milligrams per liter of total nitrogen, and we're somewhere around a little bit less than 1. The St. Johns River is getting better. That's the blue line measured at State Road 50. And you can see that our red line is where we discharge nitrogen into the river. And so those numbers are looking better and better. Phosphorus, here's our profile for phosphorus. Again, we're allowed to discharge around 200 parts per billion total phosphorus. Our average is somewhere around 60 parts per billion. In the last several months, we've been somewhere around 30 to 40 parts per billion. So we're really pleased with the results that we get for phosphorus as well. Total phosphorus, there you see what's coming in versus what's leaving. The red is what's leaving, and that results in about an 83% reduction in phosphorus. So good numbers. Now, this is something I debated whether or not I should throw this in here because this is a controversial topic, but I think it's one that needs to be talked about. These are pharmaceutically active compounds. Now, we've all heard about them. We've heard about some of the problems that they've caused. Where we have direct wastewater discharge into lakes, we have had reports of alligators that have had reproductive problems, and that's what pharmaceutically active compounds can do in the environment. Most of what we have been able to measure has been extremely low, and we have not seen any harmful side effects. This data was collected by several universities, and they've done several studies, but carbamazepine is a compound that's used to treat epilepsy. The wastewater treatment plant is only able to remove about 3% of what comes into it. When it goes into the wetlands, though, the wetlands removes 97% of that, and so overall total reduction of 99%. Nadolol, it's known by its trade name as CoreGuard, so if any of you are in CoreGuard, 77% is removed by a wastewater treatment plant, 23% is removed by wetlands. And wetlands, that long detention time, there's lots of minerals in that soil that possibly are adsorbing some of these pharmaceutically active compounds. There's ultraviolet degradation, there's photodegradation, there's binding onto all those organic compounds, all that vegetation, there's uptake, there's a whole lot of mechanisms that are in place, and I wouldn't begin to know how to tell you how these chemicals are being reduced or how they're being removed, but they are. In fact, 90%, and this is just 4 little chemicals that we pulled out. There's a list of hundreds that have been tested for, and we have found that over 90% of all those byproducts that are in the water, extremely part per trillion levels. I don't know what these levels are that we're talking here, but they're parts per trillion. Over 90% of those are removed to very high rates, like 90, 95, 99% within wetlands. Again, we cannot underscore how important wetlands are to our water quality and to our overall health and to wildlife's health. So that's why I put these in here. Gemfibrozil, this is the one that in India several years ago ended up being linked to killing off all of the Asian vultures. And I was doing a little research on this, and they showed that after all their vultures were dying off in India, they had problems. Whenever any livestock or anything would die, it would just sit there and rot. And then they had problems with rats and wild dogs. The problem got so bad that in parts of India, they had wild dog roundups where they would just go out and shoot them because the wild dogs were beginning to attack humans. And so gemfibrozil has been linked to environmental problems elsewhere. But again, we're able to remove that in the wetlands. Dissolved oxygen, the wetlands do great at producing oxygen and providing oxygen, typically not in the marshes, but we aerate that water before it leaves. And so we're able to provide kind of an optimum range for fish, and we see that in our outfall. In fact, on that tour with the fellow from Abu Dhabi on Wednesday, I threw a cast net and came up with just an incredible amount of fish, and he couldn't believe it. In fact, one time at our final outfall of our wetlands, we threw a cast net. We had 11 species of fish in the net. Now that's phenomenal. I've talked to some fisheries biologists, and they said they have never seen it. I had never seen that. Typically, you might get 3 or 4 species. We had 11 species in the net. So again, great water quality means great wildlife habitat. And the habitat is not just for our beloved ducks, it's for everything. Oh, but there's a problem. You see, and we've talked about this, that organic matter buildup. As these plants live and as they die, they fall into the water, they build up that organic matter at the bottom. Marshes are known for this, they're trapping sediments. In 3.5 years within our wetlands, we came in and laid down a white sand marker layer. 3.5 years, we had about a foot of unconsolidated organic matter. That's a lot of material. Now, if we were to dry that down and go into a drought mode, that would be a very small amount. But when we see this is the type of muck, and especially when it reaches the surface, this is where we begin in our wetlands to see things like primrose willow, Carolina willow, wax myrtle. All these woody species, transitional species, begin to walk out on top of this muck and begin to take over our wetlands. When we see that happening, when we see areas with Carolina willow and primrose willow, we know that the water is channelizing around those areas because we have a constant flow coming in. So it's channelizing around, and so we need to do something about that. And so we're going to go in, and one of the things that we have decided to do is try and slow that sediment deposition rate process. And one of the things we've done is do controlled burns. And so we've started looking at that. This is a large stand of cattails. Obviously, there's a lot of standing dead biomass. We need to go in there. We're going to burn off that biomass, and hopefully we'll liberate a lot of nitrogen. We may also remove some of the phosphorus from the system. And those tall grass species, as anyone knows that has seen those fires, burn very quick and very hot. But the good news is it's out pretty quick as well. 10 days after a burn, you already have 2-foot tall cattails back. They grow rapidly. But 2 months after the burn, you can't tell there was ever a fire. The cattails are back, and we actually have better water quality after the burn than we did before the burn. Now, that's not to say we have about a 6-week window where we have a huge spike of nitrogen and phosphorus that becomes readily available. It's dissolved, it's in the water column, and it's ready available for uptake. Well, it also, as we burn these mature cattails, we may find 3, 4, 5 plants per square meter before a burn. After the burn, we may have 10, 15, 20 plants per square meter. So all that new growth is rapidly assimilating those nutrients, and so we have all this uptake that's occurring. And so we've used burns to help with that water quality problem. We're trying to remove and create better water quality. This is a video. Go ahead and start that. When the muck becomes so thick, this is what you end up with. You know, as we're driving around with the airboat, it's topped out. Wow, we have sound and everything. It's topped out. And then you begin to see this is not good quality habitat for anything except maybe mudfish and gar. What else? Alligators, yeah. Alligators will live here. But we also find a lot of exotic plants that tend to come in. Water hyacinth, water lettuce. We're going to have all kinds of bad things on top of this. You get a lot of algae that grows here as well. Very unsightly. It smells. You've got all those decomposition gases with all that organic matter. What are we going to do with this? And that's, I think, the problem that faces a lot of us. And so the next project or next area that we've gone into is we need to physically remove all that muck. And so that's when we send in the bulldozers, we drain down the water, we set up pumps, we begin the worst, nastiest part of the project. This is where the bulldozers get stuck, the excavators sink. It's not fun. It's very difficult work. In fact, that excavator is sinking. The mud is up on the glass. And I'm screaming at him, get off, get off. But luckily, those guys are experts, and they were able to get that machine out. And they come in, they put in the rim ditches to pump the water out. And once they've done that, it's dry enough, they can windrow up all of that muck, organic matter, and cattail material, and whatever other plants may be growing in there. I guess this is a video. Is this a video? Yeah. Oh no, that's not a video. Final grading is done. This one's a video. Once it's finished, this is the scope. This was the project we just finished last year. This is about 100 acres in size. Yeah, it just kind of scrolls through a series of pictures so you can see, kind of give you the scope. But we'll leave any trees, mature trees, like here's some cypress trees that were left. We actually excavate around. These are old cabbage palms and oak trees. You can see the vultures are out there jumping around, and the lines are where our surveyors will actually go through and survey about every 25 feet or so, and the berms are put back. Once that is done, it's ready to be reflooded. So you can start this video. This is just some time-lapse photography, and right back here you'll see the excavators working, if you can see that. They're breaking the levee, and this is all going to be reflooded. So about 100 acres reflooded in about half an hour, and that's pretty interesting. A lot of submerged aquatic plants are rolling in with the water. This came from one of the lakes the lake that we do have on the property. And so it reflooded, and we have started the process over of recreating a wetland and putting it back into service. We're going to give it some time. We're going to kind of let it equilibrate. We're going to try and install some aquatic plants. And one of the things that we have tried to do is, I'm not going to talk about that. I think I'm running out of time. We're going to install all kinds of submerged aquatic plants. Things like 15, okay, good. Coontail and southern naiad. These are all things that we'll find our ducks foraging in. Cara, pondweeds. And this is what a healthy marsh should look like when we're out there on it. And this is where we see the ducks. We didn't see it when it's topped out with organic matter. We see it on healthy SAV with lots of forage and proteins. One of the things that we see right away in wetlands is that periphyton begins to attach itself to all these submerged plants. That's one of the reasons they're so effective at helping us with removing nutrients. We found that cattails do a good job, but we found that once the water quality, the phosphorus gets down to around 60 parts per billion, that's about where cattails seem to stop. Submerged aquatic plants, because they can actually remove nutrients in a completely different manner. We have found that in our large SAV zones, they drive the pH way up by stripping out all the carbon dioxide, carbonic acid that's in the water, and the pH goes way up. Once that pH gets up around 8.5 and 9, we begin to see phosphorus actually precipitating out. And so if you see, when you're out in the marsh, if you see underwater plants or submerged aquatic plants that are white in color, that's kind of a chalky film that's forming on it, that is phosphorus that has precipitated out. It's probably calcium phosphate or something along those lines. And so that is a really good thing when you see that. And that is permanently gone from the system. It's not in an organic form. See, cattails will put phosphorus into their roots, into their stems, into their leaves, but when that falls back into the water and begins to decompose, that phosphorus can possibly be re-released. Some of it gets buried, but some of it's re-released. When we have chemical precipitation of phosphorus, it's not coming out unless the pH were to drastically drop to some ungodly level, which we don't typically see under natural conditions. So that's a great thing. Is this a video? I forgot what I'm showing you. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah, I mean, one of the things we've looked at are the macroinvertebrates that we find in the wetlands. And in our wetlands, we found that these little things like amphipods, the little scuds, that's what these guys are called, 1,000 to 13,000 per square meter. And Steve, I was trying to figure out how many kilocalories is a scud, but I don't know. But I did find that 50% of this scud is protein. And so ducks, and I did read, I don't know any of this stuff, I just read it, that when they're overwintering, they predominantly eat seeds and plants. Is that right, you duck guys? But then when they're actually on their breeding, in their breeding grounds, they are looking for macroinvertebrates. And so these types of things that we see here. In the wetlands, the four predominant macroinvertebrates that the University of Florida sampled and looked at for us were the scuds and were midges, these two species of non-biting midges. And so when you come out the wetlands at night, you better close your eyes when you're on the airboat because you're going to get one in a minute, and it burns, right guys? And then also the mayflies are a predominant species as well. But those larvae that are underwater, That's what these ducks are looking for. And so when we have a lot of macroinvertebrates, when we got these healthy marshes, when we got these healthy SAV beds, what does this mean to you? Ducks. And so this is a good thing. This is what we want, obviously. And not only does it mean ducks, but it means wildlife. And that's what we're all about. All of us are here because we want to see more wildlife, and we want those experiences when we go out into nature. This is a video. When you have a lot of wildlife, you know you're doing something right when you can see this many alligators in one area. I wasn't sure if I should put this in with all the duck hunters or not, but usually by winter they're gone. They're sitting on the bottom somewhere. But you can see we're biologically productive in this wetlands. This happens every summer for some reason. We can't explain it, but there seems to be a handful of days where all of the alligators congregate, and it seems to be a feeding frenzy. And I think what happens is the dissolved oxygen levels in the marsh drop, and all of the fish begin to congregate in bigger pools. The alligators follow the fish, and we have these feeding frenzies. I can't do what I do without these people, and there's two of them back here in the back. Gary and Kat are with me today, and so that's our staff. And I thank y'all for inviting us back, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Getting back to the demucking of that one cell y'all did,
Right.
did you spread the muck over the entire cell and let it aerate? And is that how you, quote unquote, got rid of it?
You know, I didn't think about showing you more slides on that. We have done that. Typically what we've done in the past, and we've demucked probably about 600 acres or so. Typically we've done a full-scale demucking where we go in there, we pile the muck up, and we haul it out. And so we've been landfilling it on our own property. We recently have a soil contractor who now is purchasing that from us. So he's selling it off as a non-structural fill. So when you hear about the I-4 Ultimate project, probably some of our muck is going to be some of those green right-of-ways that you'll see. But to answer your question, yes, we have done that. On a trial basis, we took a 15-acre area. We went in, we stirred up the muck, we oxidized it, we tilled it, we dissed it, we ran over it with the blades of the bulldozer, leveled it all back off, and reflooded it. And we're seeing really good results. We just did that last summer, so it's really too early to tell what the long-term effects of that are going to be, but I'm seeing real good results so far.
Did you check the pH of the muck?
Yeah, we have. It's been a while, but yeah, as I remember, it was down around 6 or so. So it wasn't real acidic. Yes.
Yeah, really nice talk. Just wondering, have you all done like a nitrogen budget to look how much of the nitrogen is removed, say, from denitrification versus assimilation by the wetland biota?
We used to do nitrification and denitrification studies way back when this wetlands was started, back in the early 1990s. I have that information, but we do not look at that in any detailed manner lately. So I could probably find you some info, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
I was just curious about you've got such a great reduction of total N. I was just wondering what the reduction in the different species of nitrogen was.
Well, most of our nitrogen comes in as organic, and so it's we have very little nitrate that comes in. It's all TKN, and that's really what we're discharging as well. So there's no ammonia that's being discharged. There's no nitrites. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, if you didn't demuck, you just treated the cattails, would you need to do any replanting to get native vegetation established?
You're saying when we just treat the cattails? Or, I'm sorry.
If you just treated the cattails and you didn't demuck, if you were to do that, do you think you would need to replant with native vegetation?
We do a lot of herbicide applications. We do try to discourage the cattails, especially after we've refilled an area. Cattails are obviously one of the things that want to try and colonize first, and Gary is out there all the time on the airboat trying to keep them at bay and spray them out. Where we have gone into mature stands and sprayed cattails, yeah, I mean, you would probably need to put something in, although we have had, over the years, I can remember where we brought in helicopters and sprayed them, and we would burn off all the dead thatch. And over time, those areas we did have success in recruiting submerged aquatic vegetation. So going from a cattail area to an SAV area, it can be done. We have done plantings to try and speed that process up. So I think both work, but it's just, I remember there was a professor that came out, and I spent a lot of time with him on the boat, and we talked a lot about, you know, something wants to inhabit that space. And so what's going to get there first? And that's always the question, is, you know, when we refill a site after we demuck it, or if we spray it with chemicals and we kill whatever plant is there, what is going to come in first? And so that's where I think the helping hand of wetland managers comes into play. And so yes, if we could replant it to encourage that, that's a good thing, because if not, it's probably going to be hydrilla or, you know, something else. But that's another thing too. You know, I heard we were talking about hydrilla. Everybody loves hydrilla. Most wetland managers don't. We want to see native plants. I've got data that shows that hydrilla only removes phosphorus down to around 30 parts per billion. In the fall, that plant falls apart and has a big re-release. And so our native southern naiad and coontail, we have information that shows it taking phosphorus down to around 15 parts per billion sustained. And so we need to be encouraging our native plants and not the exotics.
Thank you. I just wanted to know what your yearly budget was for managing the wetlands, how much it cost to do that kind of demucking, and then what were your funding sources for management?
Well, I can tell you all of the funding that has been done, and I keep hitting Aries up for money, but I'm just kidding. All of the funding has been through the city of Orlando. It's through the ratepayers that pay into their wastewater bill every month. So that's where the funding comes from. Our annual operating budget to run this wetlands is about $400,000, $450,000 a year. When we do one of those big demucking projects, we typically tackle about 100 acres at a time, and that we've had it estimated by a contractor. The last project we had an estimate of $1.7 million to do that demucking. We did it in-house for about $600,000. And that's, you know, we leased the equipment, we hired in heavy equipment operators, and a lot of our staff time, we oversaw that, and we were out there operating equipment and doing that as well. And that's about it for 18 inches. That's about 18 inches of muck. So you're talking around 250,000 cubic yards of material moved.
And
so we're doing it for about $3 to $4 a cubic yard.
And how often do you have to demuck each individual cell or 100-acre block or whatever you do?
That's a good question. When they built the wetlands, the original design engineers and scientists said that it would be 80 to 100-year lifespan. I'm glad that was capped. 80 to 100-year lifespan. We found that in 15 years we were having some significant sedimentation problems and organic matter buildup. And so 15 years into the wetlands operation, we went through some exhaustive studies, and we found that our hydraulic detention time had decreased, at least in one particular cell that I remember, was supposed to have a hydraulic detention time of 7.5 days. We found that the water would shoot through that cell in a day and a half. And so that was really what was the motivation for us to go in and scrape the cell and reset the clock. And so that was 15 years into it. Some of our cells probably can go 40 years without any intervention. So it just depends on the nutrient loading, it depends on the topography of the cell, it depends on a whole lot of things, but every cell's different, every area is different.
Hi, you talked about leaving the vegetative matter like cattails in the water and it releases its nutrients again. But then you talked about the use of herbicides, and I'm wondering if you use harvesting rather than herbicide use. I know it's related to the last question, management costs, but it seems like the harvested material could then be used and actually be a moneymaker. So anyway, I'm wondering what you have to say.
I agree with you, and I keep having that same thought. You know, I keep thinking all that organic matter, it's a great compost, it's a great fertilizer. The problem is finding the market for it because it's so expensive to truck that material. That's what we've run into. The guy down the road sells topsoil for $8 a cubic yard. After we've demucked this, it's sat for a year, it's broken down. It looks like topsoil. I've taken it home, I've put it in my garden. I grow the best tomato plants in my neighborhood. The problem is trucking it. We're way out in a remote rural area. The most we could get for that is $1 a cubic yard through a contractor. So the expense is in the trucking. It is a great, but again, you've got to be careful with any type of organic matter that's being dredged up from a wetland or lake or river bottom because it is a sink. And so we test that material 9 ways to Sunday looking at all kinds of priority pollutants and heavy metals. We have a very clean system because we are getting basically nutrients and that's it. The Iron Bridge plant, they don't receive a lot of heavy metals from industry. So it really depends. Like if we were to take the muck off the bottom of the St. Johns River right around Highway 50, you probably couldn't use that because it probably wouldn't meet the EPA sediment thresholds for those pollutants. So it really just depends on the muck that you have and how far you are from somebody that can use it as to if it's valuable or not.
So I'm actually talking about the vegetative matter before it becomes muck. The actual cattails that you would use herbicide on, instead of using the herbicide to kill them, cattails or whatever, harvesting them that way before they get to be muck. The answer might be the same as far as trucking, but
well, I'll
that was
tell you
my
one of the
question.
things we looked at with cattails are as a biofuel. You know, cattails have been shown to be about twice as productive at producing ethanol than corn is per acre. The problem is, again, harvesting it, finding a market for it, finding someone to do that. So, I mean, yeah, it'd be great to tackle some of those things because I've always thought if we could take all those wetlands up and down the Mississippi River that have been drained and converted to corn for ethanol, why not take them and put them into cattails? We clean the river, we provide wildlife habitat, and we create ethanol. Yeah, there's answers out there, we just got to get there. I don't know how we get there, but politically, you're right, politically.